you. And I'm sure you already have the territorial acknowledgement, but I'm honored to be here on the traditional territory of Coast Salish peoples, Haishkasiam. I want to, actually I'm not going to speak about what you said I was going to talk about, because I could be with the Purple Party tonight. I'm not going to talk about anything about a Green Party. I have had I've got an increasing commitment to getting rid of first past the post. I always thought it was a bad voting system, and that's from before I got into politics. I just knew as a Canadian and as a voter that there was something quite wrong with our voting system, and I thought I knew quite a lot about it. I learned a lot more over the period of time that I was a member of the Special Parliamentary Committee on Electoral Reform, which was I was appointed in June of 2016, and we worked our buns off all summer and into the fall. It was an all-party committee, meaning that it included the Green Party and the Bloc and NDP, Conservatives and Liberals. We traveled the country, we visited every province and territory, we held hearings, we heard from every expert within Canada, and we brought in experts from around the world by video conferencing. It was, for those who, I'm glad I had what I thought was a fairly high level of understanding of what's wrong with winner-take-all voting systems, but I learned a lot more through that process. And it comes into sharp relief as we in British Columbia have a chance to get rid of first past the post as a voting system. So what I really wanted to share with you is how I think, and I'm going to assume, it might not be a safe assumption, but most often when there's a community meeting to talk about electoral reform and proportional representation, the people in the room already know they want to get rid of first past the post. They already know quite a lot about it. So what I thought I would do with the time I have, and I apologize for coming late, because I was just finishing at the Gulf Island Secondary School grad, and I will apologize for leaving early because I have to catch the 7:50 ferry. But I do have a friend, this is identified, Michelle, don't let Michelle forget, to get me out of here and drive me to the ferry because I'm walking on. So I should be fine. I should have a good hour with you so I don't have to run off and be disruptive. I hope there's some time for questions after my colleagues and friends have spoken. But I wanted to share a couple things with you that worry the heck out of me as we have a chance this fall to get rid of first past the post in British Columbia. And I should also mention, at a larger national context, the Quebec elections, I don't know how many of you have heard, the Quebec election, which will take place on October 1st, the opposition parties, Quebec Solidaire, CAQ, Parti Vert de Quebec, all the opposition parties have said, so the only party that hasn't agreed is the Liberal Party of BC, that at the end of the election, they will get rid of first past the post and bring in specifically mixed member proportional without the need for a further referendum, if those parties win the majority of seats. So in a sense, the Quebec provincial election has become about getting rid of first past the post. Prince Edward Island had an official piece of legislation passed in their legislature recently, which says whenever they go to the polls to elect a new provincial government, having had a referendum that the Liberal government of Prince Edward Island chose to ignore the results. The voters of Prince Edward Island in a mail-in referendum chose mixed member proportional, but the Premier said not enough people voted. So voting turnout was too low, so it wasn't going to be binding. Never mind that about a decade before PEI had a vote, and with lower voter turnout, that referendum had said, let's keep first past the post. And a different Premier said, well, then the matter's decided. The voters want first past the post. So we know how this goes, right? So, but what Wade McLaughlin and PEI did say was, well, we'll put a question on getting rid of first past the post on the provincial ballot. So there's high voter turnout in PEI most of the time on provincial and federal elections, and they will have a question on the ballot about getting rid of first past the post. We know we have a referendum coming up, and it will be critical for us that that referendum pass. And it's in a two-parter, and I'll leave it to others to describe what the BC ballot looks like and how we strategize around that. What I wanted to bring to the conversation was, what do we as individual British Columbians do to make sure we win that vote? How do we talk about electoral reform? Because one of the tendencies I've found over the years is that people who want to talk about electoral reform very quickly sink into detail, Well, in mixed member proportional, you don't have to clump the ridings. You could do 2 ridings, you could do 3 ridings. You can then vote preferential ballot, but you don't have to. But the main thing is you get a bunch of, or if you do mixed member proportional, it's really wonderful because the proportional votes, then you top up the votes based on the reserve sets of seats, and it's all very clear and different. What I learned in the Electoral Reform Committee was that it's really hard to win a referendum for change on any issue. We had experts, I don't know who thought of asking these people to testify to us, but because the state of California has zillions of what they call propositions, so every election in California there's a bunch of Proposition 22 and Proposition 14 and Proposition. Of course, in a state as large as California, same population size as Canada, a lot rides on these propositions. So naturally, a whole bunch of consultants have sprung up whose only livelihood is how to win a referendum vote on a proposition. So these WizKid experts told us that the general industry rule of people who make their living out of winning propositions is that they will not take the yes side in any campaign unless a year out from the vote, yes is polling at 70% or more. Because in a referendum campaign or proposition campaign, no always has the advantage, and the yes vote will be watered down over the course of the vote. Hold that in your mind, I'll come back to it. The other thing we learned as a committee from polling information, which is a different set of pollsters, Angus Reid in Canada, polled Canadians about what they know about our voting system. So they asked a large Canadian sample size, enough to be statistically significant, accurate read of what Canadians know about their voting system. They asked Canadians a multiple choice question, so not open-ended. What system of voting do we use in Canada? Multiple choice. Preferential voting or ranked ballot, proportional representation, or first past the post. Only 40% of Canadians could accurately pick that the system of voting we now use is called first past the post. So you can see the obstacle in front of us is most people don't really know what the system of voting we now use is enough to critique it. It's the system we use, but they don't know what it's called. Well, 40% knew out of a multiple choice question. The level of public understanding of why we would want to change our voting system is therefore very low. And it's easy, and we saw it in the referendum campaign in 2009 in BC, it's easy to push people to a default position of, well, I'll keep the system we've got because I don't understand what you people are talking about. It can't be bad, we have a good country. So what I want to share with you is my own sense of how we have to talk about this issue. It's first to tell people first past the post is dangerous. We don't want to beat around with which one is better. We need to explain to people some basics about winner-take-all majoritarian voting systems. And by the way, ranked ballots or preferential ballots are also winner-take-all. In other words, that riding by riding, whoever wins that riding, the other votes don't count. So riding by riding, winner-take-all systems of voting are dangerous. The problem is that most of the times that we approach this issue, it's as though we've got a better idea, and it's really great, but you're not going to understand what when I explain it to you. So I think pretty much the only thing we have to explain to people before the referendum, well, during the referendum campaign and as it is any voting system that separates the public's will, the public vote from the result is dangerous in a democracy. A lot of us, I think, in British Columbia will be wondering, how did someone like Doug Ford become Premier of Ontario? Well, he's not sworn in yet, but he's Premier designate. And a lot of Conservatives were horrified. I talked to a number of Conservative MPs who said, well, my first choice wouldn't be someone who's known as a good businessman if the business is drug dealing. It's really not what we would have wanted. But if you look at the election results in Ontario, well, you all know that the progressive Conservatives in Ontario got 40% of the vote. But dig a little deeper. What was the turnout to vote? What was the rate of participation? 58%. So 58% of Ontarians who had a right to vote voted. And of that 58%, 40% chose the Conservatives. So if you look at seat count, it looks like a landslide for the Progressive Conservatives. If you look at popular vote, it wasn't that much of a landslide. The NDP did very, very well, and the separation of votes between NDP and Progressive Conservatives wasn't that large. If the popular vote had been reflected in the way Queen's Park was assembled, I don't think Doug Ford would become Premier, because Andrea Horwath and the Ontario NDP and Kathleen Wynne and the Ontario Liberals, what's left of them, plus, if of course it was proportional representation, they'd have more seats, and Mike Schreiner for the Green Party, if he would have had more people, would have at least ensured that they had a working relationship, whether a coalition or otherwise, so that the policies of Doug Ford would not become the policies for Ontario. That's just one example of how first past the post is dangerous. Donald Trump is another very good example of first past the post is dangerous. Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Doug Ford. A lot of Canadians don't know that in first past the post in Canada, we have had elections where the party that got the most votes did not form government. So the perversity of first past the post for me, that's why and I'm happy to get out of the way very soon and see how others feel about this, but I think the perversity of first past the post, really explaining it to people, not as, yeah, that's how we voted, but we could get a better system. Better won't cut it. People need to know that it's dangerous. But Canada will eventually get a Doug Ford. Kevin O'Leary was there running for leader of the Conservative Party, but he didn't get in. He's the closest thing I've seen to a Donald Trump in Canada, being a reality TV star. But he Andrew Scheer's policies won't be what the majority of Canadians want. Harper was in a lot of ways Canada's Trump. But more dangerous people will emerge, and what we need to do is essentially inoculate our system against someone dangerous and a party with dangerous ideas gaining 100% of the power unless they're supported by the majority of Canadians. If a party that I don't like forms government with a majority, but the majority of Canadians have voted for that party, well then that's democracy. But if someone becomes prime minister with a set of policies that are actually dangerous and seizes 100% of the power, because in Canada, our prime minister and the majority government has far more power within our system of government than a US president has in their system of government. Our prime minister with majority in Canada controls the legislative and executive together. And thank heavens in the US, there's divisions of powers, and certain times Trump is frustrated by a failure of even his Republican allies to pass legislation he wants passed. In Canada, we're particularly vulnerable to a voting system that causes a very dangerous distortion between the way we have voted and the seat count. So I'm hopeful that we can get this referendum passed in BC, but it's going to take a tremendous amount of word of mouth, grassroots engagement on the order of when you're at the checkout counter at Thrifty's, strike up a conversation with the clerk at the till. If you're getting your hair done, talk to your hairdresser. When you're at the gas station, talk to the guy at the pump. This is not going to be a referendum we can win if we just talk to each other. We're going to have to really take it out there. And for me, I think the number one message is this system of voting, which is used by only the minority of democracies in the world. Countries don't shift from PR to go to first past the post. It's always the other way around. First past the post is an anachronistic, bizarre voting system that only works in countries where there are only two parties. And according to a 1921 study in the Parliament of Canada, it's inappropriate for Canada because we already, since 1921, have always had 3 to 4 to 5 parties. So we can say it's not the best system, again, I think we need to say it's a dangerous system and this is why we've got to get rid of it. And then the choice of what we take instead is a conversation where I'm basically agnostic. Please, anything except first past the post. Thank you for letting me wrap.